So it's now my pleasure to introduce the next part of this afternoon's session. Our next speaker, I think of him as being at the epicentre of where science and farming collide. He is an exciting mix of farmer, scientist and orator. Not afraid of a good argument, he stands up for what he believes in. As a member of the senior management team, Bruce Thorrold is the strategy investment leader of productivity at DairyNZ. This role is responsible for directing the investment of $20 million of our levy money to deliver improved feed production and animal performance and develop improved farm systems. This investment includes research and development inside DairyNZ, along with partnerships with CRIs and agribusiness industry groups and individual companies. Notable recent projects include the Pastoral 21 research, the Forage Value Index, setting up of DGAT and the transition of core data and animal evaluation from LIC to DairyNZ. Here today to talk about the future of our pastoral systems, can we please welcome Bruce Thorrold.
Thanks, Ben. That's a great introduction. It's been a fantastic couple of days. We've got the slides up. Excellent. So with a title like that, you're probably all expecting me to roll out a discussion on how you buy a $200 CRISPR kit, figure out some yellow split peas and start feeding those to your cows on a boat floating in Rotterdam Harbour. But you're going to be disappointed. Today is very much about being good at what we do best, pasture-based dairying, and where we're going to go to that. And in saying that it's undisputed that productive pastures are a key to our competitive advantage, I absolutely acknowledge that that's a blue card trick moment. It's a risk that in focusing so hard and so clinically on what we do well, we miss the other opportunities. But today is about this, and the other opportunities are for another discussion. So taking it as undisputed that productive pastures are a key to our cost competitive position, they're a key to our quality of product, they're a key to the story we tell, and as Colin Holmes used to say, they provide a fresh bed every night for cows to lie down on. It would be reasonable to expect that dairy farmers in New Zealand would have access to a system of forage improvement that had some key interlinking parts. It would have independent data so that farmers were able to have confidence in the products they were buying and the quality they were adding on their farms. As a consequence of that farmer confidence, farmers are willing to pay good money to plant breeding companies for superior seeds. Armed with that commercial business model, the seed companies, also informed by the independent data, which illustrates where value comes for farmers, would be working hard, reinvesting that money and continuing to produce better products. And so we get a whole cycle where the whole thing feeds on each other, the commercial sector, farmers, and the independent analysis. In fact, it's our view that not only is that a reasonable thing to expect, it's actually a fundamental plank of how we should be building our dairy pastures. And if we look at the success we've had in this kind of system with animal evaluation and cows, it's a great model to aspire to. But if I think back 10 years ago, that's not the situation we faced then. Farmer confidence was low. Pasture persistency was a hot issue in this part of the country, and to the point that Stuart King and Henry van der Hayden had an interesting chat at the first of these farmers' forums 8 years ago, like this morning, about AR1 and why was that still being sold to farmers. So farmers had a real lack of confidence in their pastures and particularly in new pastures. There was very little independent data being collected, and in fact advertising and brochures dominated the information flow. And the plant breeders were busy breeding plants, but really nobody had any particular insight into how much gain they were making and whether we were keeping up with the other plant systems in the rest of the world of dairying in the US and Europe. So that was a pretty untenable situation. And in the time since then, DairyNZ has invested your levy. It's worked with partners in science and with business to try and build a much better system. And what I want to do today is talk about the things we've been doing in this whole context, talk about where we've succeeded and where we're disappointed still, and talk about where we go next. So let's start with farmer confidence, and it wouldn't be farmer confidence talking about pastures in this part of the world without starting with ryegrass persistency. So let's get the bad news out of the way first. There is no fail-safe answer to ryegrass persistency in the northern half of the North Island. That's a really disappointing thing for the science team. I know it's a frustrating thing for you guys, but that's, at the moment, where we're at. And we'll talk a bit about why. And part of the why is that while we call it perennial ryegrass, ryegrass is perennial in the same sense that you're still using your grandfather's axe. That axe has been rebuilt over the last 50 years with 10 new handles and 3 new heads, but it still looks like the same axe. What ryegrass does, and Dave Chapman held my head under the water for long enough to actually make me believe this a while ago, what ryegrass does is rebuilds itself every year, one tiller at a time. The plant you see out there today, none of that will be there in 12 months' time. Ryegrass is in a constant annual battle to survive. And what you guys tell us and what we've seen is that some days, some years, some places in this part of the world, ryegrass loses that battle. So that's been a real challenge for us to try and understand and remedy that. So, and part of the problem we had was that while we were getting a lot of farmer feedback on this, we were struggling to see these collapses happen in research settings where we had good information and a real good history on what had happened in those paddocks month by month. Well, we've now seen it for ourselves, and we've lived it, and anyone who's doubting what you told us doubts no longer. We set up this trial in May of 2011. It was set up as a long-term persistency seeding rate trial. 3 months after it's sown, it looks pretty fantastic. Probably in need of a slightly earlier nip-off, but not looking too bad. 5 years later, and this was taken a year after that, that population had collapsed. Ryegrass content and tiller densities had halved, and weeds had invaded, and the classic scenario that you've seen yourselves at times. So let's have a look at a little bit of the data and just to try and understand what happens here. Now, you're going to see the same graph about 5 times in the next 5 slides. 3 things you need to focus on. The first is that sawtooth thing along the top. So this is 5 years of data. What that shows is the soil moisture deficit throughout the year. So the bigger the hole, the bigger the downswing in those lines, the more soil moisture pressure, the more moisture pressure that those plants are under. The second thing you need to look at is the black line in the bottom graph. That black line is ryegrass content. So, ticks along in a reasonable band, and then towards the end collapses. And the third thing you need to look at there is the black triangles. The black triangles are grass scrub numbers. Up to 2,500 per square metre by the time you get to the collapse point for the ryegrass plants. So let's just take that one step at a time. So here's the trend with ryegrass, ticking along quite nicely for 4 years, averaging about 70 or 80% in the sward, and then over 2 years collapses down to 40% till the numbers halve. That happened coincidentally with grass scrub numbers. So grass scrub numbers were low for the first 2 years and then started to build, as they often do following cultivation events, and got to the point, as I say, in autumn of 2015, where those numbers were well up over 2,000. You see the crash in ryegrass that happened there, and similarly the next year after a winter recovery. But the second thing that happened, and this is the whole one threat is not the issue, those coincided with a very dry summer in 15-16 and also a very hot summer. Now, ryegrass does not like dry, it does not like hot, and it doesn't like being eaten from underneath. When those forces come together, it'd be fair to say that the best management and the best endophytes in the world will not protect ryegrass in this environment. So by contrast, here's exactly the same experiment over the same years at Lincoln, irrigated. 80 to 90% ryegrass, getting stronger every year. Interestingly, tiller numbers down there twice as high in the same cultivars as they are from the Waikato. So clearly an environment at which ryegrass is having a great time, even though grass scrub numbers in that got up into the 1500s by the end of that period. So what are the key messages out of this? It takes more than one thing to kill ryegrass. Ryegrass is actually pretty damn tough, but when the forces line up against it, soil type being a difficult soil type, drought, overgrazing, insect damage, whether it's black beetle or grass grub, current ryegrass cultivars, current endophytes, the best management you can put to it isn't enough to save it. We've learned a lot of things that it's not. We're struggling to figure out how to sort it out, but we've learned what it's not. So it's not new cultivars. All the evidence is that the new cultivars are at least as persistent as the old cultivars. It's not poor grazing management practice by itself. Many of you may have been told that clearly the problem was you're grazing these cultivars too hard with hungry cows. By itself, grazing management and overgrazing will not kill ryegrass. It's not plants getting old. We had one that if, over a period of a decade, the plants that survived became old and weak, they don't. All the evidence is that the plants that survive are better than the average of the population you sowed in the first place. So what have we learnt that makes a difference? Things that help. Not overgrazing in summer, effective endophytes, fertiliser and particularly nitrogen management in early summer. Things that make it worse, insect pests and black beetle and grass grub are the key ones. And this whole kind of cycle around cultivation. So when grass grub first came storming through Taranaki and the pumice country in the 70s into the 80s, one of the surprising kind of results at the end of the day was the best way to get rid of grass grub was to leave it alone. Because every time you went in there and cultivated, got rid of the grass grub, you reset the whole soil biology balance. So all the predators and diseases of grass grub crashed out. The grubs spent the next 3 years getting ahead of them, chew the hell out of the next pasture you sow in before the diseases and the predators catch up with them. So this whole kind of cycle, which we can reset by trying to fix the problem, becomes enduring. Soil types, the light soil types, the peats and the ashes certainly seem to be worse. And tetraploids, one of the few signals we've got out of the persistency data we've been able to get our hands on, and it's not a big signal, the tetraploids are less persistent under the same management than the diploids. So what do we do next? As I said, there's no fail-safe solution, but we can reduce the risks. There's a number of things in the research pipeline, so recovery options. So when those populations first crash out, instead of just hoping it'll get better, what can we do? Deferred grazing and allowing plants to reseed, which of course they don't tend to do in our high utilisation environment. Under or over sowing, again looking to minimise that soil disturbance. Early summer management, these are all things that are being tried in a new research program starting this coming autumn. Breeding solutions, this has been a really tough one. We've looked for predictive markers. Is there something we can measure in a ryegrass plant which tells us when it's a year old, whether that's a cultivar that'll last 10 years? We can't find anything. And we're dogged by not having enough long-term data. So we're in a bit of a data gap here as well as an option gap. Some really interesting work in soil biology. Ag Research has been doing some fascinating work here. If I had to back one area where I think we might be able to make some big gains, it's this whole understanding of soil biology and how all the things we can't see work. And Roger talked this morning about biology and all this gene technology. We've now actually got some tools for the first time in my career where we can actually start to understand what's going on in soil biology other than the things we can count and see. So it's a long way off, but these are the areas where we might really make some ground. So that's persistency. Independent data. This is an area we put a lot of work into with particularly the launch of the Forage Value Index. So in a quick snapshot, the Forage Value Index, it's a profit-based measure. It takes the seasonal yields, so the month in which we get extra yield and the cultivar is important, turns it into an economic value, adds it up in a profit-based index, and calculates one for each of those 4 zones of the country. And what we've found is that the cultivars that do best in one part of the country don't necessarily do best in the other, and north of Taupo, will come as no surprise to you, is the defining line. Here's some output. Now, I've deliberately picked the slide that had the most information on it. What you can see here is now there's a wealth of data coming out of the calculations we're doing. Just a few key points. The star ratings and the profits, that's the ranking system. There's data there about each cultivar and its seasonal yield pattern. There's really useful data about the confidence in these trials. So just as with young bulls, they are less reliable before they have daughter proofs. What we do here is put a score in there for how reliable, how many trials, particularly in the area we're talking about, has this cultivar had. And for the last 12 months, we've had metabolisable energy data in there, but still another year away from having it in there as an economic value. So this is all available on the website, and the seed companies now are using this quite a bit as well. So, and sorry, one more point. So one of the encouraging things about this has been we're now getting strong seed company buy into this. There are now 5 companies with cultivars as either 4 or 5 star rated in the northern North Island. So it's not simply a gain for the big companies. You know, we're seeing the other ones get on board and put their cultivars through the system and start to come out with some good rankings. What happens next? We want to get metabolisable energy and persistency into the index. 2 important points here. The first is that the lack of data is a real hamstring to us, and the second thing is we want to do it together, because if we put tetraploids in or with metabolisable energy only, they go to the top of the ratings, and yet we know there's a trade-off with persistency. So if we don't get those 2 traits going in together, you guys are going to get a misleading message, and nobody wants that. Interestingly, the people who least want that are the seed companies, because they were very conscious of the trust that needs to be built with you guys. So we have a lack of data. It's been one of the things that's been typical of the Forage Value Index. When we first started it, we launched it almost ahead of having enough data. Not almost, it was ahead of having enough data. What the process has done has been drag that data out. So it's got the companies investing, it's got the data being collected much faster than if we'd sat back. So we're in the same position now. We're trying to drive the traits forward and putting pressure on to get the data we need to do it. So we don't have ME data available on a cultivar level, so we're going to end up ranking plants in categories. Similarly with persistency, it'll be a category basis and just a diploid and tetraploid split is what we're after. As we said, we don't have the predictor traits we'd like, and now we've got to look at where we get the data from. So dedicated long-term trials. We're really interested in the idea of whether we can get on-farm data to help drive this, just a sheer bulk of data to overcome the variability, and the potential for genomic selection to be an important tool in persistency in the future. And if we go and look at the star table, we can see that anywhere between up to $600 a hectare difference in profit predicted between 1-star and 5-star cultivars. We go and look at some of the independent data we've been getting on genetic gain. We see pretty similar figures. In the upper North Island, perennial ryegrass, $18 a hectare a year. And if you compare that with the rate of gain we're getting out of cattle breeding, which is about $30 a hectare a year, there's some pretty big numbers in there. So do we believe that? Do we believe that these are the gains we're getting from our pastures, that our 5-star pastures are $600 a hectare more profitable to us than our 1-star pastures? Well, we're about to face the breeze on that. June the 1st, end of this month, is a really important date for Forage Value Index, because it's the day we start the systems trial at Scott Farm. 140 cows, 10 herds, paddocks with high, farmlets with high and farmlets with low star rating cultivars, and an expectation that we'll generate $400 in profit more out of the high star cultivars than we will out of the low ones. And that comes down to capturing the benefit of both extra yield and a much better seasonal distribution. So the growth pattern in these modern cultivars, these high ranking cultivars, much better matching the seasonal demand pattern of cows. So we're doing this in public. The index is going to be on trial. It's not actually the cultivars. We won't even tell you what cultivars they are. That doesn't matter. What's important is, does the index predict what the cows and the farm systems can deliver? So day 1, June the 1st, 2018, and we look forward to keeping you up to date with those trials. So I just want to finish off by talking about new breeding technologies. So the comment that was made today about by Roger about the biological techniques. This is the technology that's let us really get going, probably only in the last 5 years in terms of the new breeding technologies. For a long time, we really didn't see where the gains were going to come from, and now we've got a number of horses in the race. So 3 things I want to talk about just very briefly: genomic selection, F1 hybrids, and GM. And you've heard me talk about these before, so this is an update on where we've got to. So genomic selection in ryegrass, just like in dairy cattle, relies on collecting an awful lot of data and using that to speed up the generation interval. So selecting cultivars and getting them in the market quicker because we're confident in their performance based on their DNA. What this needs, just as in cattle, is a lot of data. So thousands and thousands and thousands of samples being collected. And we're now at the point now where we're bringing these together. So our training populations, the data out of the field, going into prediction models, so all the DNA from these plants being put in there, and big computers and very smart maths and the sort of stuff you can't do on your cell phone, apparently, leading to predictions of the performance of those plants. And what we're doing now is testing that prediction. Because if these predictions are accurate enough, then the seed companies will start changing their breeding programs and start accelerating the rate of genetic gain. And best estimate is we could double the rate of gain in our forages if this works. We're probably a year away from having the first kind of definitive reports on this, so we're getting close to the moments of truth. The F1 hybrid, so this is crossbreeding in action. It's the maize model, and being able to capture that first generation hybrid vigour in the plants, which currently we lose in current breeding programs. We've talked about the potential before, in carefully controlled conditions on research farms, 20% gains. Well, the guys in Dairy Bio, which is in Australia that we're partnering with on this, they do stuff at an amazing scale. Those are side-by-sides down there at Hamilton, Victoria. This is on the 6 months of the year where it's green there. And there are just thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of plants out there. We could have talked about robotics. These guys do all the sensing on this now with drones and things running around with fancy cameras on them. So fantastic technology. The first of these plants are now, the first of the hybrids are now in New Zealand with agri-seeds in evaluation trials. The results to date look promising, and again, we're getting close to the moments of truth with this technology as well. The last one I want to mention just briefly is the work that AgResearch have done with the GM forages. So again, we've talked about this before. A fantastic piece of science where they've taken some DNA, put it in the plant, and been able to both increase the level of lipids and energy in the plant and increase its photosynthetic efficiency. So 40% gains in glass houses, but the cows don't live in glass houses. So we had to get these plants out in the field, and we've done that now a year ago in the US. So these are the first plants in the ground last year in what was really just a pilot program. The good news is they lived. We got them out of the glass house, into the field, in the sunshine, they lived. The second trial, which is now actually going to collect some real data for us, is going into the ground as we speak. So again, within the next year, we're going to start to get a sighter on whether that potential in the glass house turns into potential in the field. And of course, we couldn't talk about just growing more forage without talking about footprint, because we know that more dry matter eaten is more methane, more nitrogen in the cycle is more leaching. So how do we avoid getting down a single-minded focus on production and not figure out how we're going to use these plants in our future systems? So some of these solutions are simple, replacing board and feed, and you'll know that the forage value is driving companies to breed into the deficit periods of our season, not just to add to the surplus. But also, being able to generate lower footprint pastures, potentially through the introduction of plantain or other plants that come down that sort of track. But also, at least in the GM and some of the gene editing technology, the potential for the ryegrass itself to have a lower footprint. And right now, it's really only the lipid technology that has real promise there. But the CRISPR, the gene editing, the new technologies that are coming through have a lot of potential to offer. So let me finish just by kind of doing a bit of a self-assessment on where we've got to. If I look at this, independent data, huge gains, really pleased with what we've done. Better plants and plant breeding, we've made some gains, but we're really just getting to the proof point now in terms of whether they're going to really deliver. And farmer confidence, well, that's where I've got my biggest question mark, because certainly feel that not having cracked the persistency problem is an issue. But I am confident that you guys are getting now an independent data stream and clarity, even if you don't always like the answers. So let me just finish by saying that we're really focused on the value of pastures. We've been investing your levy to both drive and join up that whole kind of plant improvement system. we're determined that you've got the information and the plants and the confidence to be in love with your pastures. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for that presentation, Bruce. Certainly a very good summary of where we're at with the Forage Value Index. Now, we've got a bit of time for questions. So I'm just, where are the mics? Are they around? Yep. Any questions for Bruce? There's one up the front here.
Sure.
Oh, whoops, you mean back?
To the cogs.
That one, yep.
That is a completely impossible situation. Well, let's hope your whole effort is not fraught with the problems that is.
You can't see the third dimension. It's, in the third dimension, they're all spinning fine. Don't worry about it. Yeah. I need a harder question than that.
Down the back, there's a question. Thank you.
You're focusing on, you're talking about pasture, but you're focusing on ryegrass, and we all know that clover's a very good complement to ryegrass, and I guess I liken the balance there between Weet-Bix and chocolate, so why are we focusing on the Weet-Bix when we could be focusing on the chocolate?
Yeah, good question. Absolutely agree. All the work we've done shows the value of clover both in terms of total yield, nitrogen fixation and quality. In the pastoral genomics program, there is a whole genomic selection on clover program as well that's running. So that's where that's the effort we're putting in there.
Just to add to that question, Bruce, do you see a time where there may be other species added to the Forage Value Index?
Absolutely. So it would be another useful step, just to follow that line of questioning, would be to have pasture mixes in the index. So what's the value of a ryegrass compared to a ryegrass plus a clover? So that's another way we could take it. You could very easily take a fescue or another grass and just plug that in there. It's a question of the data and the time.
Thanks. Louise?
A question. With the ryegrass grown, even over the past 20 years, we're still sitting in the 12, 14, 16 tonne a hectare. We've been there for a long time, but with land values doubling and getting very expensive, where's the game changer? We've got to be looking at 50 tonne of forage per hectare, not sitting at 15.
Yep. Well, the grass doesn't choose how much to pay for the land. So, these things have to be in balance. The Forage Value Index trial is going to tell us if we have actually made any progress. Is there really 2 tonne and a better distribution in these modern cultivars or not? To get to 50 tonne, even to get to 30 tonne, to get to 50 tonne, ryegrass will not get us to 50 tonne. I mean, if these GM forages turn out to be fantastic, maybe we'll get 20% out of those. But we've got to think about water and nitrogen as well. If we want a real game changer, and I can't quite think what it is, but we're probably going to end up in cropping systems. When we've tried those, we've seen they've added cost and complexity, often produce lower quality feed, and have a whole bunch of issues. So I can't see the perfect solution to the question you're asking, which I guess is how do we not just grow more feed, but make it more profitable at a lower footprint. There's a real challenge.
Kia ora, and thank you very much for your presentation, Bruce. I think we've heard from all the speakers today that we need to protect our productivity, we need to focus on increasing our profitability, and that we're going to desperately need research and innovation to get us there, and particularly in the greenhouse gas / impact on farm of climatic events. How big is our gap in research funding, and as an industry, we need to look at increasing our levy to fund more fantastic projects like this to help us ensure the viability of the industry?
Well, the second bit's a governance question. I'll invite Jim up to answer that shortly. Everything, I've been in the science business for a while now, everything I've learned in the last 10 years doing this job with your money has been that if we really want to crack problems, we've got to invest large amounts of money, and I'm talking programs of the order of $5 million a year, with smart people over long periods of time. We are under funding pressure in science. Milk flow's stopped, obviously, so the levy's not going up. The government, while it's talking a good game, is putting more pressure on us. It's harder and harder to get research funds into the primary sector, and particularly into the productivity areas. So there is a squeeze there, and we're really good at maximising our leverage, but I don't think we're going to make the gains we need with the current research spend.
Without taking the words out of Jim's mouth, where we're at, I suppose, as Bruce said, we have a declining levy income, which makes things tighter. We are focusing on being much more efficient with where we are investing and making sure we've been very, not that we haven't in the past, but making sure that we've been very targeted towards making sure our investments fix the problems that have been identified in this latest strategy refresh. Our budgets are showing the next year plus are going to achieve that, and after that we'll definitely be coming back for conversations if required. And if the need is there and we can definitely see the gains, it's a conversation that will be had at some stage. Any other questions? Yep.
Awesome presentation, Bruce. You commented on the interaction between pastures and clover and potentially some work in the future. There's a number of us using direct drilling now as a means of trying to conserve moisture, deal with soil compression and silt loss. But we've seen some work recently from Pioneer where, in actual fact, the biggest issue with emissions and moisture is actually the amount of time between when a plant's killed off and when we get the new. Yep. So do you know if there's any work on the interaction between the pasture species and some of these techniques that we're using, for those of us who are trying to improve things by using things like direct drilling?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head, Pete. No. Sorry. It's the honest answer, as always.
Any other questions? So I suppose, Bruce, do you still think ryegrass should be at the core of our pasture-based system?
Ryegrass takes a hell of a lot of beating. Even in the northern North Island, when we've had a go at fescues, not as easy to manage, harder to keep quality on. So ryegrass is a fabulous plant. If we can make it better, then I think it's still core part of the system.
Cool. If there's no further questions, I'll invite Richard to come back up and close the session.
Great.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks, Pete.